God's chosen ones. You already defeated what was meant to break you. Here are the signs. There comes a moment, not with trumpets, not with confetti, but in the still, almost invisible hush of your spirit, when something shifts. It's not loud, it's not seen, but it's undeniable. You stop begging heaven for a breakthrough, because suddenly you realize you are the breakthrough. There's no outside proof, no crowd to clap, just a holy stillness in your bones that says, the war is over, and you didn't just survive, you won. If you've felt this quiet knowing, if the world hasn't caught up yet, but your spirit has, this message was written in heaven with your name on it. Your peace was the proof. There was a season where you begged for relief. You fasted, you prayed, cried into your pillow and asked God, will the breakthrough come? But what you didn't realize then was that the breakthrough had already begun, not in your bank account, not in their opinion, but in your soul. It started the day you stopped needing to be seen and chose to be still instead. The world thought your silence meant surrender, but heaven knew it was strategy. You weren't being punished. You were being positioned, and now a strange peace sits in your chest. You wake up without panic. You breathe without racing. You walk into rooms that once intimidated you and realize you're not afraid anymore. That peace, that holy stillness, that is not delusion. That is divine confirmation. You didn't wait to win. You became the win, while the world is still looking for evidence. Heaven already declared the outcome. And this story? It's not about who clapped for you. It's about how God crowned you when no one was watching. Welcome to your revelation. This is how you'll know. You've already won big. Part 1. The quiet after the breakthrough. There was a time when silence felt like punishment, when every quiet room reminded you of what you lost, the conversations that stopped, the people who walked away, the prayers that hadn't been answered yet. But then something changed, and it didn't come with lightning or loud applause. It came in a whisper, a calm that didn't make sense, a peace that didn't ask permission. At first you didn't notice. You were too used to the noise of striving, trying to heal fast enough, work hard enough, pray strong enough. But one morning you woke up, and there was no panic in your chest, no urgency, no fight, just stillness, sacred, holy stillness. You made your coffee, you opened your Bible, and for the first time in a long time, you didn't ask God to fix anything. You just sat with him, because something inside you knew breakthrough had already happened. Not outside, not in your job or your bank account or your relationships, but in your soul. The old you would have tried to explain it away, would have said it's just a phase, just a good day. But the new you knows better. You're not in the eye of the storm. You're in the stillness that comes after God says, it is finished. You're not waiting for peace anymore. You are living from it. And though the world hasn't caught up yet, your spirit already knows. You've already won. Part 2. The power of no explanation. You used to need people to understand you. Why you walked away from that job. Why you didn't go to that event. Why you said no to the relationship that looked perfect on paper. You used to explain yourself until your voice went hoarse, until your spirit felt drained. You thought clarity would earn you compassion. You thought if you just said it the right way, they'd finally see you, but they never did. And now you know they were never meant to, because something sacred happens when you stop explaining. When you stop handing your pearls to people who only know how to trample them. when you stop trying to earn peace through someone else's permission. At first, it felt like loneliness, but it was actually God pulling you into solitude, sanctifying your silence, teaching you the holy language of boundaries. Now, you speak less, but your spirit says more. You walk away quicker, but with peace, not bitterness. You've learnt the difference between being kind and being available, between having a heart and having no boundaries. You've learnt that divine confidence isn't allowed. It's quiet. It simply walks away from confusion and lets God do the explaining. They still talk. They still wonder. They still assume, but you don't correct them anymore, because you're too busy building what they'll never understand, too focused on obeying the voice that called you out of the crowd. You've stopped needing to be explained, because your life will speak for itself, and it will speak with miracles. You never asked to be noticed, but lately people turn their heads when you walk in. They can't explain it, and neither can you, but something has shifted. They say you glow. They say you feel different, and you do. Not louder, not bigger, but lighter. Like your soul is no longer dragging baggage it was never meant to carry. Once upon a time you tried to blend in. You dimmed your voice, your vision, your light, just to make others feel comfortable. But God didn't wire you for camouflage. He wired you for clarity, and now your presence speaks without words. Not because you're trying to be impressive, but because you've been impressed upon by heaven. You've been refined in private, and it shows up in public. You sit in rooms you once felt unworthy of, and now the room adjusts to you. You don't shift to match the energy anymore. You break it. You don't try to lead. You just do, by being aligned. It's not arrogance. It's authority, because peace is powerful, and favor is loud even when you're quiet. There's something in your eyes now, a holy knowing, a calm that unnerves those who haven't met their own. You no longer force doors to open. You shift the atmosphere until they swing wide. And the most beautiful part? You're not surprised, because deep down, you knew this would happen. Not because you're better, but because you're becoming. And when you finally become who heaven always said you were, everything around you begins to respond. Part 4. Divine detachment. There was a time when you held on too tightly to people, to places, to outcomes you prayed would happen exactly how you imagined. You clung because you cared, because letting go felt like failure, because the thought of losing something you loved made your heart ache in places you didn't know could break. But somewhere between the heartbreak and the healing, you loosened your grip, not because you stopped loving, but because you started trusting. You stopped begging people to stay, stopped forcing timelines that weren't ready, stopped chasing what didn't chase you back. Now when something starts to drift, you don't panic. You pause. You ask, God, is this release my redirection? And you let it go, not in bitterness, but in worship, because now you understand what's meant for you doesn't require bondage. It returns without begging. It stands beside you without pressure. It breathes with you, not against you. You've developed a holy detachment, not from life, but from control, from forcing, from fear. And in that release, you found something stronger than certainty, peace. You used to pray for things to work out. Now you pray for the strength to let go if they don't. Because you've seen what happens when you surrender. You've watched doors close only to find palaces behind others. You've watched relationships end only to discover the fullness of your own identity. You don't call it loss anymore. You call it alignment. So if it falls away now, you don't chase it. You bless it, and you keep walking. Part 5. Speaking without shaking. There was a time when your voice lived in your throat. You had something to say, but fear always showed up first. What if they laugh? What if they leave? What if they twist your words into something you never meant? So you stayed silent, smiled when you wanted to cry, nodded when your spirit screamed no. You watered yourself down until even you couldn't taste your truth anymore. But now your voice has found its way home, and even when it trembles, you speak. You say what you used to rehearse only in your head. You ask for what you need. You tell your story, not for applause, but because it's yours. You're not performing anymore. You're proclaiming, not to convince them, but to confirm you. Every time you open your mouth and don't shrink, you're breaking a generational silence. Every time you speak your truth and don't apologize, you're healing something ancient in your bloodline. It's not about being loud. It's about being real. You're no longer afraid of what people might think, because you're finally more loyal to your calling than their comfort. Let them misunderstand. Let them walk away. You've spent too long mute in rooms you were called to lead. Now you walk in boldness, not because you're fearless, but because you're faithful. And even if your voice shakes, you still speak, because heaven listens. And when you speak from your spirit, your words don't just land, they plant. Part 6. The Overflow Giver. You used to think you had to be full to pour, that you had to have it all together before you could bless someone else, that healing had to come first, then maybe you'd be qualified to help. But God showed you something different, because somehow, even in your own lack, your hands kept giving. Even when you were quietly bleeding, your mouth still prayed. Even when no one noticed your tears, your heart still encouraged. You gave love before you felt lovable. You offered peace while waging wars inside your own soul. You lifted others while still climbing your own mountain. And it wasn't fake. It wasn't forced. It was faith, a quiet kind of strength the world doesn't celebrate. The kind that doesn't make headlines, but makes heaven stand still. People didn't always see what it cost you, but God did. And every unseen act of compassion, every hidden moment of sacrifice, was recorded. You've stopped waiting to feel ready, because you've realized what flows through you doesn't come from you. It comes from God, and His supply never runs dry. That's why you can give while you're still growing, bless while you're still breaking. Hold space for others even while your own heart is healing. You don't wait for abundance to start being generous. You are abundance, because when you give from the overflow of faith, even your emptiness becomes sacred. Even your struggle becomes a river. And that it is not just strength. That's divine embodiment. Part 7. You're no longer in a hurry. There was a time when you ran from moment to moment, afraid you'd miss your blessing, afraid if you slowed down, everything would fall apart. You treated life like a race, timing your prayers, measuring your worth by progress. But something sacred has changed. Now you rise slowly, you breathe deeper, you sit with your coffee a little longer, not because you're lazy, but because you're no longer panicking. You've stopped chasing timelines that weren't written by God. You've stopped comparing your pace to people who don't carry your calling. And you've finally understood that waiting isn't weakness. It's wisdom, because heaven's timing is never rushed, only revealed. You don't fear delays anymore. You know divine detours carry divine intention. You know what's for you won't pass you, and what left wasn't meant to stay. You no longer measure progress by how fast you move, but by how present you are. The world tells you to hustle. Heaven invites you to trust. And now, instead of asking, "Does it happen?" you simply whisper, "God, prepare me for it," because what's unfolding in you is deeper than goals. It's alignment. You've stopped striving to get there and started becoming the version of you who can receive it. And when peace becomes your pace, you're already on time. Part 8. The taste for simplicity. There was a season when noise felt necessary, when you filled every quiet space with distractions, trolling, striving, staying busy. Not because you loved the chaos, but because you feared what silence might reveal. But now you crave quiet like oxygen. You no longer need the loud, the flashy, the fast. You've tasted something softer, something sacred. You find joy in slow mornings, in handwritten prayers, in the sound of leaves dancing outside your window. You'd rather walk barefoot in the grass than run in circles trying to impress people who don't even see you. Because your soul is done performing. It's done proving. It's done pretending that more equals meaning. You're not running from the world. You're just no longer ruled by it. The simpler life becomes, the deeper your spirit breathes. Because somewhere in the stillness, you remembered. You weren't created to be impressive. You were created to be in union with God. And that kind of intimacy doesn't shout. It whispers. In the ordinary, in the unposted, in the overlooked. Now the things that once thrilled you feel empty. And the things that once felt too small now feel like home. You've fallen in love with what can't be bought. Peace, presence, a heart that doesn't flinch when things don't go as planned. This isn't boredom. This is awakening. Because when you stop chasing everything, you find the one thing that matters. And in that simplicity, you discover you didn't lose anything. You just cleared space for the divine. Part 9. The signs begin to echo. You started noticing the patterns, the same numbers on clocks, the same lyrics in songs, the same words whispered by strangers that echoed your private prayers. First you brushed it off, called it coincidence, but deep down your spirit knew. This wasn't random, it was alignment. Heaven was speaking, not through thunder, but through threads, weaving confirmation into the fabric of your everyday. You'd think of someone, and they'd call. You'd pray for a sign, and it would show up in a sentence, a billboard, a breeze, and something in your soul would still itself. You're not imagining it. You're not reaching. You're being reminded. God never stopped talking. You just finally got quiet enough to listen. Now you see his fingerprints in everything, in the interruptions, in the redirections, in the gentle nudges that say, "This way, child." And the more you notice, the more you realize you're not walking alone. Real, because this is what divine alignment feels like. When heaven begins to echo what your soul has been carrying for years. Not everyone hears it. Not everyone sees it. But you do. And that's how you know you've already stepped into the rhythm of something sacred. You're not guessing anymore. You're being guided. Part 10. The inner alarm. You used to stay where you didn't belong. Rooms that felt heavy. Conversations that left you empty. Environments that drained you. But you stayed. Because you didn't want to offend. Because you thought tolerance was kindness. Because you hadn't learned to trust the alarm God planted inside your spirit. But now, you feel it instantly. That holy dissonance. That deep unease that doesn't speak in words. Grovel in weight. You walk into a space and your chest tightens. A smile crosses your lips. but your soul knows something is off. And instead of silencing it, you listen. Because that's not paranoia, that's discernment. You've matured. You no longer override the warning signs just to avoid discomfort. You no longer ignore the shift in your body that says, this is not your place. You realized, peace doesn't have to scream to be real. It just has to withdraw when you're out of alignment. And so, now, you leave earlier, say less, excuse yourself gracefully, because your peace isn't up for negotiation. You don't stay where your spirit feels suffocated. You don't entertain what your soul has outgrown. You don't settle for close enough when God whispered, set apart. They might not understand why you left. They might say you're being sensitive, dramatic, distant. But you're not. Oh, you're just protected. And when your presence shifts because your discernment spoke, you don't owe anyone an explanation. Because when you've won the war within, your soul starts rejecting every environment that threatens your resurrection. You're a quiet inspiration. You didn't set out to inspire anyone. You weren't trying to be a light. You were just trying to survive. To find your footing in a world that rarely made space for your softness. But something happened on the way to your own restoration. Someone reached out. I don't know what it is, but your words brought me peace. You said exactly what I needed. Watching you rise gave me permission to hope again. And you realized, without trying, without announcing, without even knowing, you became the evidence. Not because you were loud, but because you were honest. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present. Your healing journey sent ripples. Your private battles became someone else's lifeline. Your ability to keep going quietly gave others the strength to stand. You didn't need a platform. You didn't need a following. You just needed to keep walking with integrity, and heaven did the rest. Because when you live truthfully, you teach others how to live free. The most powerful thing about your story is that you never needed applause to keep going. You weren't chasing recognition. You were chasing wholeness. And somehow, in the process, you led others there too. You became a mirror. In a right, quiet revolution in someone else's darkness. And that's how you know you've already made impact. Not by trying to be inspiring, but by choosing not to give up. Part 12. You're not afraid to be alone. You used to dread your own company. The silence felt loud. The walls too quiet. Thoughts too heavy. You filled your calendar, your phone, your heart with noise. Anything to avoid sitting with the ache. Anything to avoid facing the mirror. But something shifted. The ache turned into awareness. The quiet became a friend. And your reflection stopped feeling like a stranger. You no longer need someone next to you to feel seen. You no longer chase people to avoid your own soul. You've learnt that the greatest healing doesn't happen in crowds. It happens in solitude. But now, you crave it. Not because you're broken, but because you've discovered a version of yourself you didn't even know existed. And she is holy. He is whole. You take yourself on walks. You sit with your thoughts. You light a candle and talk to God, not as a beggar, but as a beloved, because you're not running anymore. You're resting. And when others ask, don't you get lonely? You just smile, because you know the truth. You're not alone. You're becoming someone who no longer fears the silence, because you finally trust the voice that speaks within it. This isn't isolation. This is sacred union with your soul, with your purpose, with your Creator. And when you can be your own sanctuary, no storm can shake you. No rejection can undo you. No absence can empty you. Because you're no longer escaping yourself. You've come home. You were crowned before the world ever clapped. Anointed in the shadows. Anointed in the silence. Long before anyone saw it. Heaven already knew. Every battle you didn't brag about, he saw. Every silent night you chose prayer over panic, he counted. Every moment you didn't retaliate, but released, he honored. You didn't win by being loud. You won by being faithful. Not once, but over and over again, in rooms where you were ignored, in seasons where you felt forgotten, in prayers that felt unanswered, but never unheard. And now the signs surround you. Your peace is louder than your past. Your discernment is sharper than your disappointment. Your joy is deeper than your explanations. Your spirit no longer waits for permission to rise, because it already did. The world may still be watching for proof, still asking for evidence, but heaven already gave the verdict. You've already won, not when they celebrated you, but when you kept choosing obedience while bleeding. That is what made you chosen. That is what made you dangerous to darkness. That is what made you unstoppable. And if you're reading this now, it's not a coincidence. It's confirmation. You're not waiting for the light. You are the light. You're not hoping for the win. You became the wind. So take a breath. Stand taller. Walk slower. You've crossed over. And now, it's only a matter of time before the world sees what heaven already whispered. If this spoke to your soul, drop a comment. I already won. Heaven said so. Share this with someone who needs to remember who they are. And if this mission of truth, healing, and divine confirmation matters to you, consider supporting the journey with a gift of love, not because we ask, but because your spirit was stirred. Details in the description. Chosen one, keep walking, not with worry, but with wonder, because now the world is about to see why you've already won big.